It's a hard nut, but hard nuts can be cracked. Life has been a set of challenges, particularly for a country like India. One of the developments this time, in fact, has been a very explicit recognition by President Biden. We all know why reform has been blocked for so many years.
You referred to reformed multilateralism, and you acknowledged that reform of the Security Council was at the core of that, but that's a really hard nut to crack. How, in fact, do you think India can advance its purposeful agenda for reformed multilateralism? And I ask you this against the background of your strong commitment to diplomacy and paying more attention to diplomacy, but also as a former ambassador to the UN and committed multilateralist. I think if India can help to lead the way on this, then it would be a very good thing in the current circumstances globally.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree with you that it's a hard nut, but hard nuts can be cracked. If I look back and say, well, this one is too difficult, I wouldn't be doing too much in my life. I mean, life has been a set of challenges, particularly for a country like India. So I would not let the difficulties of that challenge deter me or discourage me. In fact, I'd put it the other way around. Ask yourself, put India aside for a moment. Look, there are whole continents today which actually feel that the Security Council processes do not take into account their interests. I mean, I spoke earlier about Ukraine and a sense in the global south that their problems of food and fuel and fertilizer are being just brushed aside. And frankly, if you go to a UN General Assembly and talk to countries, there are countries in Africa and Latin America and the small island states, quite apart from Asia and India, who feel very, very strongly that this is not their UN in a way. And I think that's hugely damaging to the UN. So one of the developments this time, in fact, has been a very explicit recognition by President Biden of the need to actually reform the UN, which is not a small development. But we need to because we all know why reform has been blocked for so many years. So I think it's important to keep up the pressure. There is global sentiment out there. We completely understand. I mean, this is not something which is going to be done easily and necessarily speedily. But it's something which has to be done finally. I would like to place this relationship in the larger context of global politics. I think in an immediate sense, we are grappling with what I would call a 3C challenge, which is COVID, conflict, and climate change. I think these are the three big issues which have disrupted world politics, disrupted the world economy. And in many ways, I think they frame the larger context in which India and Australia discuss world politics. But preceding those, or certainly preceding the Ukraine conflict and the COVID, are the longer-term changes which have been unfolding really over multiple decades. Changes which perhaps had one big inflection point in the global financial crisis of 2008. The fact that we are looking at a much broader distribution of power and influence in the world, that conversations and decisions are no longer as narrow as they used to be. I would say the global rebalancing in many ways is a even bigger picture in which we need to look at the relationship. So for me, whether it's the accumulated bilateral relationship or the geopolitical changes or the big global issues of the day, I think all of this in a way has been distilled into the emergence or the re-emergence of the Quad. I would argue that one of the reasons why the Quad worked in 2017 and subsequently, as opposed to the first attempt at it in 2007, a decade earlier, was the fact that India's relationship, bilateral relationships with the other three Quad partners had developed sufficiently by 2017 for us to actually take this initiative forward in a manner in which perhaps we couldn't do a decade earlier. And in that, if you look at it chronologically, and I've had the privilege of being associated with all these relationships, I would say the India-US had changed in the most dramatic and perhaps in the most profound manner.
A few days ago, President Volodymyr Zelensky was on this very stage, albeit by video link. Let me begin by asking, what have you made as an observer of individuals and politics and diplomats and leaders? What have you made of his wartime leadership over the past 8 months, I guess starting with that critical first weekend after the invasion when he knocked back an offer of safe passage out of Ukraine with that memorable phrase, "I don't need a ride, I need ammunition." What have you made of Zelensky as a president?
You know, in any situation, you're partly shaped by your impressions which are inherited or which pre-exist. The only time I've seen him up close was actually at Glasgow on the sidelines of the COP26 when he and Prime Minister Modi had a very interesting discussion about a range of issues, including business cooperation, investments, trade. What could Ukraine do to build up its relationship with India, because it wasn't really as substantive as it could be. That was my first impression. I must also confess I've really not focused that much on the individual leaderships of different countries in that part of the world, even though I'm very familiar with that part of the world, largely because we've never had a crisis, or we've never had the stakes out there to be that intensively engaged. Having said that, I think a lot of what are the perceptions of the world have been shaped by obviously the events which have happened. For us, from an Indian perspective, our particular challenge was that we had 20,000 students in Ukraine. They were caught in the middle of the conflict. Most of them studied in eastern Ukraine. And extricating them required not just diplomacy in the normal sense, but actually having Prime Minister Modi call up Zelensky, call up Putin, engage me talking to Kuleba and to Lavrov and at various other levels. So I think there's a kind of a cumulative picture out here, and certainly our expectation would be that he's somebody we will continue to be engaged with. In fact, Prime Minister Modi spoke to him last week. In what we believe is the need to return to the path of diplomacy and dialogue, because we honestly don't think this conflict is helping anybody at all.